purpose of this video is to talk about versions. So versions are simply snapshots of your hierarchies and master data. In this example, I already have a version called the working version. When deciding on versioning strategy, there are many different options to think of. You can have a single version which houses all of your organization's hierarchies. You can store each hierarchy in its own separate version, and there are advantages and disadvantages to each of these strategies. For the purpose of these videos, we're going to use a single version that houses all of the hierarchies to make it simple. In my screen here, you can see that we already have a version called working. I'm going to create a new version by clicking the new version button. And I'm just going to enter a name. I'm going to call it demo. And press OK. And you see we have this new version called demo, right? And the first thing that you notice if you're comparing demo to working is that you see the icon next to it here is filled in versus grayed out. And what this means is that anything with an icon that's full like this is loaded into DRM's memory. So DRM operates 100% in memory, but it has the option to save down to a physical disk in the database. And it does this for performance reasons. So if you see the icon is grayed out, that means that this version exists in the database, but it hasn't been loaded into memory yet. And you can easily load it into memory by right-clicking and hitting the load button, right? And once it's loaded, you'll see that that icon is not grayed out anymore. So I'm just going to right-click and unload it just to show you, again, the difference between the two icons. Now, it's very important when working with versions. I think the most common mistake that people who are newer to DRM make is that any new version that is created in DRM exists solely in memory. So if you see this section here that says saved, right, you see there's no checkbox next to demo, and there's a check mark next to working. So by default, when you create a new version, it's not automatically saved down into DRM's database. It only exists in memory. So what happens more often than not is somebody creates a version, if it's their first time or they're new to DRM, they create a version and they create a bunch of hierarchies in there. They leave for the day, they come back the next day and they notice that it's gone. And they say, well, all this work that I did yesterday is gone. What happened? And what happened is if you don't save the version or mark it to save the version, it only exists in memory. And if DRM services are restarted, that version will go away. So I'll show you what I mean. If I just right-click and unload the version from memory, it disappears. And the reason that it disappears is because I didn't mark it as a version to save, so it's considered a temporary version. So in order to create it again, I have to go in and follow the same steps that I went through before and re-add it, right? And again, you see that the check mark is not in the saved category, so I have to right-click and I have to hit save. Now, this is a one-time thing. You do not have to do this every time you make a change. Once you mark the version as a version to save, it will always save automatically anytime you make a change. So now if I right-click and I do unload, you see that it's still here. The icon is just grayed out now. That's because it doesn't exist in DRM's memory, right? And you see the load status here changes from initialized to loaded when the version is loaded. So you can also use that load status to tell. Over on the right-hand side, you may not see this right away. If you click the version properties button, you will see this, this panel pop up. You can set properties in DRM at the version level. So there are a bunch of built-in properties that, for example, under this system category. And then there are other properties under additional categories. And we'll talk about creating properties and categories and so forth. These are some of the ones that come in the DRM templates that that exist on the server. So if I just open up FDMEE, you'll see that there are a bunch of properties here that I can set. And we'll go into these in more detail when we get to the properties and property categories section. With versions, you can also set version variables by clicking this button here. And what a version variable does is anytime you have a job, let's just say you're exporting hierarchies from DRM, or you're running an action script or anything like that, you can reference a version variable rather than a hard code in the version name into that automation, so that if you change versions, all you have to do is update the variable, and you don't have to go into every single script that you created and make the change there. So once I click that version variables screen, you see that we have one variable that already exists called FDMEE map version, and that's built in when you load the FDMEE template. And if I want to create a new variable, I can just click this button here, and I'm just going to call this demo version variable. Put the same thing for the description and object access. So this allows you to set who can see this variable. So if I set this to user, only me, only my user account that I just logged in with can see this variable. If I set it equal to standard, then anyone with access to DRM can see it. If I set this to system, only system administrators can see this variable. So I'm going to set this to standard. I'm going to click OK. We're going to see that now a standard variables object access group is created, and you can edit it to assign a version. So I'm just going to assign my demo version. So anytime I reference demo version variable, it's going to automatically use the demo version. So I'll save that. I will hit close. And we are done talking about versions. With versions, there are a couple of additional options that you have. So you can right-click on demo, and you see that there's a create as of version. So an interesting feature about DRM is that you can reconstruct any hierarchy in any version at any point in time. So you can say create as of version, and it uses the audit history in DRM to reconstruct what that version looked like. So you can give a specific date, you can give a specific time, you can go down to the second, and DRM will go and show you what that version looked like at that point in time. So now we don't have any hierarchies within this demo version, so I can't show you exactly what this looks like. When we get to compares and some of the other features, we can play around with these as of versions a little bit more. But just wanted to call out that option is there. And you can also back up versions and restore versions to and from files. So these require some connections. So we'll talk about connections in another video. And you can select which version that you'd like to back up, or versions. And you can enter a file name. that's backing it up, restoring it. Same thing, we choose a connection. We choose our file name. It asks us, which versions that we would like to restore. And then it asks us for a new version name. So I'm not going to actually do this, but just to call out, when you're restoring a version, you can't just automatically overwrite an existing version in DRM. So you have two options. You can either delete this demo version first prior to doing the restore, or you can enter a new name and bring it in as a new version. So I'm just going to cancel out of this, but wanted to show you what that looked like. Well, that's it for versions, and we'll see you in the next video.